So over 60% on the survey, or around 60%, said that they were considering homeschool or have decided to start this fall. So you've made that decision, and now what? You need to find curriculum, right? Relax. Like Gerald said, you have 30 days from the time you decide until you have to notify the government, the homeschool office. And those notification forms are fairly simple to fill out, but they do require that you have a plan, that you have a plan for the 5 core subjects, language arts, math, science, history, and it's 5, isn't it? Social studies? Social studies, yeah. So what do? This isn't that difficult. It is actually a nice journey because you get to decide what you're teaching your children and how you're going to teach. And part of that is learning how or figuring out how your children learn, because it makes a difference on the curriculum. Most young children, elementary, they need a lot of hands-on in order to cement information into their brain. Filling in the blanks in worksheets is not the best way for them to learn. So you have to look around to see what's available and realize that no 2 families are exactly the same. What Diane uses for her children to homeschool isn't what I used back when I homeschooled her. She was homeschooled all the way through, and I was the homeschool mom. So there is no one right way. There are many right ways. Some families do a highly structured education plan for their children because their children thrive on that. Others have a more relaxed form of education in their home. We have the freedom to choose because the government allows us to choose how we want to educate our children. There are some limitations. How many kids you have, how much money you have to spend, how much time you have to do this homeschooling. Those are considerations when you're choosing a curriculum. Homeschoolers are known to be very frugal and use what they can to make their homeschool great, even though they're not spending a huge amounts on fancy curriculums or video schools or things like that. Finding the perfect learning plan for your child can be a challenge. Most public and private schools use a formal curriculum, but their curriculum is geared towards a classroom setting with many children in the same age range. Whereas when you homeschool, you have 2 to 4 children in different ages, and you need to work around that, and it would be very difficult to do it with a whole curriculum for each grade. So think about how you're using your curriculum. If you do decide on a curriculum that you think somebody recommended, and you start and you get 2 months down the road and it's just not working, but you spent that money on this curriculum, so you keep forcing your child to do this and it's just not working and you're not getting any joy out of it, know that you don't have to continue using that curriculum. What would you say? You own the curriculum does not own you. I have used 8 math programs in 8 years, so it's okay to change. So there are several different educational approaches that you can use. If you want more information on some of these different approaches, check out the website homeschool.today. It has a lot of information on there that can help you with looking through the styles of education. So the one we are used to, if you attended public school like I did, is a traditional textbook approach. There are a lot of companies that produce a curriculum with textbooks where the teacher teaches the content and then the student reads and then they fill in blanks basically. So each subject uses a separate textbook and includes review questions, and the child has to read and write. Parents assign lessons, administer tests, and evaluate reports. And they have to be very hands-on with that. Some of the examples of those kind of here are... Okay, some of the examples would be a Becca. That's a classic in homeschool world. It was huge when I was a kid, so it's been around a long time. They know what they're doing. It's excellent. You open up the workbook, you do the work in the younger grades, and the older ones, you open up the textbook, you do the work. But it is very heavy. It is very time consuming. It takes a long time to do all the lessons and all the grades and all the subjects.
So it's a big time commitment and it can be overwhelming for some kids. Bob Jones is another one. It's very similar to Abeka, where there's workbooks or textbooks for each subject, but they have everything. It's pretty easy because it's set up for homeschoolers. Saxon Math is a textbook math. It's also a classic. I did the same books I'm now doing with my children. I just started doing Saxon Math this year, and I remember why we did it. It's still good. It's still amazing. It's thorough. Explains the lesson, has the practice problems. There's no bells and whistles, but it is a textbook-based math program. And Apologia Science. It is a textbook science, but it does have some really good hands-on activities, experiments, and I often use it as a group activity or as a unit study with multiple ages. So it is adaptable, but it is meant as a subject to be done as a textbook.
Just an aside, Apologia was actually written intentionally for homeschoolers. It wasn't written for schools. The other sort of traditional type homeschool or schooling is consumable workbooks. So we're work text. So you get one or two pages of information, and then there's questions to fill in the blanks. And often they're in PACEs or life packs where you have 10 books for each subject that you have to complete for each year. So you would start in book 1 for LA and book 1 for math and book 1 for science and book 1 for history. And then you would move on to the next book and the next book and hopefully get it all finished by the end of June. Some examples are?
Matthew C is a workbook based. It's probably the most popular homeschooling math curriculum. It's also written for homeschoolers. And that one has a lot of manipulatives. It's called Matthew C. So you see it, you do it, you feel it, but it's very workbook. You fill in the blanks. Alpha Omega is another one. Christian Light Education, or CLE, and Accelerated Christian Education, or ACE. Those are both ones with usually 10 books per year. You finish the book, you write the test, and it's a very fill in the blanks workbook, but also easy for people just starting out to use their curriculum.
So the other option is online, or internet or computer-based curriculums. There are a lot of them available, and there's more every year. We are learning how to use the computer to educate our children. So some of these can be one particular subject, like foreign language would be a really good one to do on computers so that they have a chance to actually hear a native speaker. I don't speak any other language. I have about 16 words in German, and that's about it. So I didn't teach second language. I tried with my children, but we didn't get very far because
we didn't have online apps to learn second languages when I was little.
Yeah. Some of the other ones that are often as supplements are keyboarding, math drills, music theory, foreign language I mentioned. They're commonly used by high school more so. They work really well for the child once they get into high school. They have an ability to be more independent in their studying, and therefore they can work online. It is a good choice for independent learning, good for students who have more visual learning styles. If they're good with reading it and knowing it, that would work well. You can access it from anywhere. It's really good for people that live in the country and don't have access to a lot of extracurricular kind of courses that they could take, or if they can't even get to a library. We're 5 miles from a library, which is quite small, so we would have to go to 2 hours to get to a decent library. So it was interesting when our kids were little. We actually look forward to library trips.
Some examples of online curriculum. I mean, there's so many that listing them is impossible, but Teaching Textbooks is a computer-based math program that is made for homeschoolers. So that's why we recommend it. And it's something you can either buy the CDs and run it on your computer, or they now have an option where you can buy it online and run it from online. It's self-grading, so it's very hands-off for the parent. You just check in every once in a while. Switched On Schoolhouse, which is made by Alpha Omega, is an online learning platform. Khan Academy is math, and I believe they branched into other subjects. It's free. It's on an app, it's easy to use. It's really great for short-term learning because you don't have to buy into some big fancy math curriculum, but they're still going to be maintaining their math knowledge and progressing. And Easy Peasy Online is a homeschool curriculum that's free, and it's online, and it's laid out very well. I haven't used it, but I do know some homeschool families who have used it for a time, and they have enjoyed it.
So another way that you can homeschool is using unit studies. That's what we say when we say that we incorporate all the different subjects and teach one particular concept or subject. So an example would be if you choose for this semester, you're going to learn the human body. Your science would be human body. Your language arts would be writing about parts of the human body and researching them and writing your research projects. Your art would be about the human body. You build parts of it or draw parts of it. So everything is incorporated into one unit study. It's often used by children with different age groups. So if you have young and old, a whole span, it's much easier to teach together as a family. So you aren't, if you've got like Diane, 4 children, you aren't teaching 4 different science programs and 4 different history programs and 4 different social studies programs. You would teach the same subject to all of them and expect different abilities from each of them as you do it. Do you want to add anything to it?
Some examples. The popular curriculum this year, it's brand new. It's only been out for maybe a year and a half. It's written by a lady in BC in Canada, so Canadian author, which is pretty unique. And she was actually meant to be our homeschool speaker this spring at the Manitoba Association of Christian Homeschools conference. Unfortunately, COVID prevented that. So her name is Rebecca Spooner, and her curriculum is called Gather Round. And that's what I'm going to try out this fall. I'm pretty excited about it. So that's covers everything except math. Another curriculum that is a unit study based is Heart of Dakota, which I've heard is really good. I personally have not used it, but I've heard that it's very literature based. It's very good for multiple ages. My Father's World is another one of the similar idea. And The Good and the Beautiful Science. So The Good and Beautiful, it has various subjects, but their science in particular is based on a family study where you do it with multiple ages together.
So another way to educate is called the classical homeschooling. So this is based on how they taught children or people in the Middle Ages. It was used by some of the greatest minds in history, and the goal is to teach people how to learn for themselves. So the 5 tools of learning known as the Trivium are reason, record, research, relate, and rhetoric.
Rhetoric.
I said it wrong. I read a lot, but I don't pronounce things right. There are a lot of curriculums that are starting to move towards that in the homeschooling circles because it is a very proven academic-based curriculum.
So some examples of classical education is Classical Conversations. It is huge, it's global, and it's based around community. And so Classical Conversations in general is run as a group. So a group of people get together once a week and they go over the material that they're learning, and there's a lot of memory work, and they do fun games and activities to learn those concepts. We did that with a homeschool co-op for a time, and it's amazing what young children can retain and what they learn and how those things come up later on in life. Story of the World and First Language Lessons, which are both by Susan Wise Bauer, is a classical education model. Story of the World is just an amazing way to learn about history. It tells stories and it brings history alive. And so it's a great thing to read to your kids and to use. And Veritas Press is an online classroom type of school. So they have live classes as well as self-paced classes. And I was just looking at it today and it looks rather interesting.
Yeah. Another method that some people use is the Charlotte Mason method. Charlotte Mason developed a education concept in the 1900s, and she was using this, and the kids really learned well with it. And a lot of the homeschoolers love her style. So there's a real Charlotte Mason movement among the homeschoolers. Basically, it's very short lessons covering a wide variety of subjects, as well as developing good habits. Students show what they know by giving narrations, participating in discussions, and keeping journals and history timelines rather than taking tests. The style of homeschooling uses rich literature and living books rather than traditional textbooks or children's books.
So some of the curriculums that use Charlotte Mason is simply Charlotte Mason. That one is probably the closest to the original book. The original book is very hard to read, written by Charlotte Mason, because it's very old, but it is very good. So simply Charlotte Mason is a curriculum that uses that style. And The Good and the Beautiful also uses that style of instruction combined with a workbook. That one is very, a lot of art appreciation, where you look at the art and you study it and you use that to learn.
And then there's not exactly a curriculum, but a style of homeschooling that we call relaxed or eclectic. This is using a little bit of this and a little bit of that and fitting it to your family and to your children. So if you have a child that struggles in one area, you would pick a curriculum that suits their learning style, whether they're a visual learner, auditory learner, or a kinesthetic learner. If you pick a curriculum that fits them in one particular subject and then a different curriculum that you use as a group with your family, that's what we call eclectic. So usually once you get into homeschooling a little bit longer term, you can choose what works best for your family. The advantage is that the parent feels that the subjects they believe they are most important are covered thoroughly. So you get to pick what you do. Choosing textbooks, field trips, and classes that fit the needs and interests of the kids.
A curriculum that kind of fell under this category, because it didn't fall under any other categories, is a math curriculum called Life of Fred. It's very different from any other math curriculum. It's this story of this boy named Fred. I think he's a boy. He might be an animal. I can't remember. Anyway, this is The Life of Fred, and it's about his life, and he teaches at this university. And it's silly stories, but it teaches math concepts in a very, very unique way. So we used that for a time, and my daughter came away from that one thinking story problems were the easiest part of math, which I'm sure most of you would think that was the opposite. So a mixture of curriculums could be, for example, teaching textbooks on the computer for math, and then The Good and the Beautiful Charlotte Mason style language arts, and then Story of the World classical for history, and maybe a unit study with all your children for science. That's in general been the approach that I've done, and my mom also used when teaching us, where I would try and use a variety of books and workbooks and textbooks and computers so that it changed it up and it didn't get boring.
So the last one I'm going to just mention is unschooling. Some educators feel that children are born curious. They learn in spite of us. They learn just by being in this world and looking at and exploring everything around them. Before they hit school age, they've learned a huge amount of information just by listening to or asking questions and just living life. And there's a movement in the education circles to allow the children to continue this into their elementary years and high school. So what they would visualize is that if your child has a sudden interest in, or expresses an interest, say in space, like space travel, the rocket ships, all those things, you would supply them with all the information that you can, like books, videos, online access, so that they can learn as much as they can about that subject. And then what I would do would be to try and encourage them to use their language and writing skills to express themselves about that topic. The advantage is that children have the time to research and look up what they're interested in. It's very relaxed. It takes intentionality of the parent to make sure that the child is surrounded with a rich environment of books and activities that stimulate their curiosity. As Christians, we struggle with this one because we know that we are born with a selfish nature. And if children are born with a selfish nature, they're going to want to do the easy and the least amount of stuff to get by, because that's the way we're born. It takes intentionality to get past our selfishness. And so unschooling can work, but you still need to teach your children character in order for them to continue learning and progressing. But it can be used in conjunction with some of the other curriculums by letting your children pick a topic, and then you spend your unit study learning about that topic. And they tend to learn more if they have a real interest in something. No matter what curriculum you choose, what path you follow, be prepared to ditch it. If it doesn't work, no matter how much money you spend on it, it's not worth the struggle to continue. That's one of the beauties of homeschooling. The other one is that there is a real market for used homeschool curriculum. So if it doesn't work for you, it may work for another family, and you can recoup some of your costs out of that. As you go along over the year, you may have to tweak what you're doing. Maybe that math program you got, it's not bad, but they're struggling. So maybe you might have to supplement it with something else, or go online and look at some tutorials to see if you can help them get that concept.
No matter which curriculum you choose, read to your children. Read chapter books to children who seem too young, 2, 3, 4 years old. Read the books to your kids who seem too old, 17, 18 years old. Read biographies, missionary stories, historical fiction, classics, funny books, joke books, fantasy, how-to, anything. Just get them thinking about the world in different ways. Books open up a whole new world. If your child isn't reading, then read to them. If your child is reading, keep reading to them. Let your child see you reading for pleasure and set an example. Read the Bible together, because it's the ultimate curriculum choice.
Bev and Diane, thank you. One of the questions that's here, I'm going to ask you just to speak to it. How will we know that we are choosing the right curriculum based on the school level of our child? How do you know you're choosing the right curriculum?
Well, most of the curriculums are a good choice. There's a lot of right choices. And I think you just have to go with, look at your options, look at what you can afford, look what's available to you, and then pick the best one out of that pile and then start. Just start. I would say pick a curriculum, if you can, that is meant for homeschoolers. And just start it, see how it's going. Join a Facebook page for that curriculum. Often parents will ask the exact same questions you have, and you can see other answers. And talk to a homeschool parent and get that advice. Tune in on a Tuesday night, and we'll maybe talk to you and help you through it.
As far as levels, the only thing that are really grade or age specific or ability specific are your math and your language arts. And so a lot of the math programs for homeschoolers have placement tests. So if you're looking at an older elementary, they can do the placement tests. If you're just starting out, for kindergarten, grade 1, you don't need a curriculum. You use everyday life to teach math. Math is just understanding numbers. So it's not difficult to teach that level. You can use a workbook if you want, but most 5- and 6-year-olds don't like to sit and fill in blanks on a workbook. But if you haul out the buttons and get them to sort the buttons into piles of 10, and then get them to show them the different numbers, or get a math curriculum block set.
Pinterest is your friend.
Yeah.
If you ask Pinterest for those younger grades, they'll give you more ideas and know what to do with. The other thing I was going to say, if you do a placement test and your child comes up way behind grade level, don't panic. It happens. It happens to public school kids. It happens to homeschool kids. Every kid learns at their own pace. Those kids sometimes will catch up really fast. So you start them at the level that the curriculum recommends, and then just trust the process. And they can possibly do 2 lessons in a day because they are older. And that's where homeschooling, you ask a homeschool child what grade they're in, they might just say, I don't know, because they might be in grade 6 for math, and they might be in grade 3 for reading, and they might be in grade 4.5 for writing, and they might be doing science with their grade 9 sister. So it's okay to jump around. As long as you get it covered eventually, it's fine.
Now, the other thing that I heard at the supper table today was both of you mentioned that there's a number of sort of sample, and you can get like a month or several weeks of some of the curriculums to try them and to get started.
That's a great way to try it out. Gather Around Homeschool has a few different units that are 1 week free trial. Sit down, do that with your kids, see if you like it. The Good and the Beautiful is currently so back ordered on their curriculum that they have 4 weeks free in a lot of their programs. If you go to christianbook.com, most of the homeschool curriculum has at least a few pages of samples where you can just see it. And that's a good way to look at it with your kids if they're older, and see what appeals to you.
Well, thank you for your presentation. We'll have a question and answer period later on that we'll come to. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to go into our panel. And while that's going on, I'm going to put a few questions out there. The first question that I'll put out there is, what are your parents or relatives' concerns? What are you hearing from them? I want to tell you that it's quite normal, actually, to have parents, relatives that have maybe well-meaning but are kind of critical and questioning of this thing about home education. And so that's not unexpected. So our first presenter today is Christine Wiebe. Christine is from Eastman and has been homeschooling a number of years. Christine is involved in unschooling, or at least she's got a Facebook page, Christian Unschoolers, and I suspect she'll talk about that a little bit. I'm going to ask certainly the presenters to talk about curriculum choices and methods, but also to talk about their experiences in multi-ages, in particular for those that are interested in high school. But Christine, welcome. Glad you're here with us, and we're looking forward to your sharing.
She unmuted.
I unmuted myself. Can you hear me now? Is that good? Okay. All right. Well, I think to talk about methods, I actually have to tell you kind of our whole story. We started homeschooling 7 years ago when our oldest was in grade 2, and she finished grade 2, and our second oldest had finished kindergarten. So that year, I just didn't know what to do, and I started putting things together. I was probably more of an eclectic person at that point, because I had some ideas of what I wanted my homeschool to look like, but I got a bit scared, and I wanted to fall back on what public school looked like. So in some ways we were a little bit more traditional, and in other ways we weren't. My son has always been my tough learner, kind of a bit of a, you can lead him to water, but you can't make him drink kind of student. So he's been the toughest, most challenging one to find programs that work for. But early on, I would have described what I wanted and what I would see in our home. It would have looked like using a lot of books, learning your language and your numbers through home situations, not as much like just in practical ways. You learn your grammar and your spelling by reading good books, learning together as a family, not separate. And so on. And so early on, I actually took a quiz that I found online about what kind of homeschooler are you? And so I took it, and the 3 things I scored highest on were unit study, Charlotte Mason, and unschooling. 3 of the less traditional ones that you were hearing about tonight. Hold on a second. Marissa, you need to go find Dad. Okay? And that's how homeschooling goes. Sometimes you have interruptions. So early on, we did start, I looked up some curriculums for doing unit study. And at that point, I had heard about one that was called Konos. And so we gave that a go for a year, and it worked pretty good. We had a lot of fun. One of the sections was on castles and knights and things like that. And so we made a big cardboard castle in the backyard, and we read books about the medieval times and things like that. So that really would, you can see how a unit study might then revolve around that. You're reading books about it, you're doing projects about it, and so on. We did enjoy some things about that, but I needed a little more structure because after that year, we had our daughter who has Down syndrome, and that took up a little bit more of our time, and I wanted something a little more structured. So Diane had mentioned My Father's World, and we did that for a year. It was very well laid out. If you need hand holding and just things laid out for you so you know what to do, but you're more interested in a unit study, it was a great time that we had with that curriculum. As my daughter got a little bit older, we had our fourth child, and things were still crazy and chaotic, but I decided to make a leap to Charlotte Mason because it just seemed like it might be a bit better fit for our family. And we went through a couple of curriculums there, simply Charlotte Mason, like Diane was mentioning, and we actually did another one that was called A Gentle Feast. And when I made these decisions, I'm just going to tell you that it's great to look for online support groups. There happens to be a Manitoba Charlotte Mason group that you can find on Facebook, and they were an excellent resource as far as what kind of curriculums there even are, so you can look at them. So if you think that you're interested in Charlotte Mason method, then that would be a place you could look for more information. It still was not the best fit yet for our family. It was a very good fit for my oldest, but it was not a good fit for my second oldest. So I kind of feel like I was dragging my feet a little bit. I think already a few years ago, I could see God maybe heading us towards unschooling, but it was scary and it was nerve-wracking for me. I was like, I don't know if I can do that. I'm like, and sometimes it gets a bad rap from people. It's sometimes considered like unparenting, but it really isn't. And if anything, as we're starting this, and we sort of started it a little bit at the end of the year, I find it actually needs more from me. I need to be more present. I need to know what my kids' interests are. I need to hear what they're doing and what they're learning, so I can be, I would say my role isn't as much a teacher as it is a facilitator, whether that's by being present and giving them ideas, whether it's giving them opportunities to try new things so they can find new interests, or if it is just to provide materials for them, help them get books that they're interested in, help them get a science kit for chemistry if that's what they're wanting to pursue, helping them find guitar lessons or a teacher. So there you have it. We kind of were eclectic, moved into unit study, moved into Charlotte Mason, and finally into unschooling. And as Gerald was saying, started up a Christian Unschoolers page on Facebook for Manitoba because as I was finding, there's a number of groups. I did find a Christian one online, a really, really huge one. And in Manitoba, there is an Unschoolers page, but it's just, there's a slightly different perspective when you're thinking about things like Bev was saying about character. And so I was like, there's going to be different conversations you're going to have related to how your family unschools when you're talking to another Christian family. It's just different to be able to talk about some of those things with them. So yeah, that's been set up. If you're interested at all in unschooling, whether or not you're taking the leap, you'd be welcome to join us. I think it's called Manitoba Christian Unschoolers. If you're looking for it on Facebook, that would be where you would find it. And yeah, I'm assuming there might be some questions later, but I think that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Christine. Really appreciate that. We appreciate your sharing the story of where you've come from and where you're going. I'd like to now ask our next presenters, Earl and Maureen Taves, who come to us from St. Anne. And they've been involved in homeschooling for many years and are actually very involved in the registration for the Matches Conference. And really appreciate their help in that capacity. So if you've been to the Matches Conference, you will have seen Earl and Maureen there. And we'll turn it over to them and ask you guys to share from your perspective and some of your experiences. And I know that there's a number of people that are particularly interested in the question of what do you do when the kids get older and are approaching those high school years. So I know that you've graduated a number of students. So maybe if I can ask you to speak to that to some degree as well. And I'm just looking for your name here to make sure that you're unmuted.
If not, I'll just yell.
No, you're good. We can hear you perfectly. So good to go.
Well, I'll kind of do what we go through. Sometimes Maureen does all the work and I get all the glory. And so I'll do the introduction and then she can take over the grunt part of it. But just a quick introduction. We've been homeschooling for, I think, 16 years. We've got 4 biological children, and we got twin boys, the youngest of them, and we just graduated them this year. And I still remember the panic that we shared when we journeyed into homeschooling, and the question was, what are we doing? Are we going to ruin our children? I'm just going to give a really quick kind of end story, and then I'll let Maureen kind of share some of the journey up to it. So we've graduated 4 of our children. We've got one that's in business management. We've got one that's in accounting services in a business. We've got one that's in post-secondary education, actually in a government college. And we've got one that is actually in car mechanics and is setting himself up to take to go for his red seal in mechanics. So I guess we didn't, in that way, as far as education goes, ruin our children. And so I know for me and I, we're kind of like, but for us, the journey was always about character. And so I'm just going to let Maureen take over some of the process of how we got to where we are.
Hi, it's so great to be here. I'm glad you could join us for the evening. Like Earl said, our goal was always to teach character. We saw homeschooling as discipleship, that we kept our children close to us to learn about the Lord and to learn that character and so forth. So we state that because you're going to have to remind yourself of that throughout the year and year after year. And even in the later years of homeschooling, I still had to remind myself, or Earl had to remind me of that, of what our goals are, so that helps in choosing the curriculum and knows how in choosing what you put your hand to in the day and so forth of your goals. And it was character, it was discipleship for us. As Earl said from early on too, something he always said was that we weren't homeschooling to protect our children from the world, but to prepare them for the world. So it wasn't done in a fear-based way, but in a proactive way of what do they need to know, and their character, what do they need in the character to be able to go out and be good citizens, to share the word of God and so forth. And part of that was that we would teach them to be critical thinkers and communicators, that they wouldn't just take mom and dad's word for it, that they would research it and so forth. So that did make for some very lively conversations in our home. That sometimes I wondered why we wanted that as one of our goals, because it was challenging, but in the end, it's very much worth it. So early on, I'll lay it right out, I'm more of an eclectic homeschooler. We definitely we did Sax and math. Well, we started with Horizon, which moves into Sax and math. I needed that. So that'd be more traditional textbook. I needed that structure for it. And then we also, from the early years, did a very structured Shirley English grammar program, which had jingles and stuff like that to learn your English rules, which gave a good basis for the rest of their homeschool years. So in those ways, I was probably more traditional in seat work. We had 4 children, as mentioned, and we sat them around the table. And sometimes I felt dizzy in the morning after our math tour. You know, you're bouncing around and stuff. But then as they get older, the older one helps the younger one, or sometimes the younger one helps the older ones. So we did that. But what I found important in our home to do was to have things on hand. So I would say, yes, get curriculum, but I would say also get resources to have on hand. We had like building blocks and shapes, and it was neat for them to learn geometry or just to figure out our arts in that way. We kept encyclopedias. I know it's old school, but we did encyclopedias, and we could pull that out and look at it. Maps, atlas, globe. We keep maps on our walls and stuff, so we could ask questions and pop up and go, you know, this. We did games that helped, and Professor Noggins and so forth, so that we could learn those things. And as was mentioned in previous two, we did a lot of reading, and that allowed for a lot of questions. We did everything from, well, Diane mentioned it all, like the whole gamut. We would read, and we would take those questions, and then we jump up and look on the map where it was, and so forth. Or if you read something neat about a certain kind of castle, we would look at pictures online of what those castles looked like so they could have the visuals. Science in the younger years, we read, we just did experiments, we just nature walks and stuff, and a lot of library books. And then more in junior high, we did apologia and sat them down with it. I will speak to the high school years as we for homeschool graduates. We too have a little one here that now needs some attention. For our homeschool, for our high school years, we continued on with, like, they would do math and so forth. We every year would sit down and go, what was important to us and to them of what to learn. So of course, your language arts, your math, your science, social studies, and so forth. We sat down to do that, always keeping in mind that we were developing character. We remember having a conversation with our oldest that he was almost in a panic about what kind of career. And we didn't know what he was going to do either, and he wasn't sure. But the character goes with you no matter what. So even if his career changes through life, his character will always be with him. So we focused on that, and that helped too, because you can get into a panic of what are we doing, and what are they going to do, and are they going to have all the subjects. But in character, they'll learn that. They'll learn to be patient. They'll learn to go and learn what they need to do. So for high school years, they would do their math, they would science and stuff. And it wasn't so much, they get older and they're doing their things. So it was more that here's your subjects, and I would go around and make sure that they were doing their work, but it wasn't so much me over their shoulders anymore, because they can read, they can do things. One of our children, he still liked that time with mom and reading and so forth. So we would do some of the history lessons and science lessons together, but the others kind of found their spots in the house, and we did that. And then we would allow them to pursue their interest as well. Our oldest son loved computers, even though we didn't have a computer in the house till he was 13. He loved computers, and in his teen years would do beta testing for different things, for Microsoft and so forth. We allowed him to be a part of those things, and he learned so much. He kind of became the tech guy, but that needed time. So we allowed him that time on the computer. We just kind of kept having a saying in our home: is it productive? Is what you're doing productive? So it wasn't just video games. Well, they played those things. But is it productive time? So we allow them to explore that. We have another son that loves political sciences, and it was amazing that giving him time, sometimes I thought it was a little bit long on the device, but he was studying up different political sciences. it's important at those years to allow them to explore those things. But it also means as a parent, you need to give them time to hear them out. So we would go for walks or our supper table. Don't discount how important that supper table is in the education realm, in the homeschooling life. So we would go for walks or at the table and then just leading questions, or why do you think that, or what did you learn and stuff. And they would open up and start sharing about their interests. And we allow them to talk and to narrate that out. That was so important.
If I could just interject real quick here. One of the things that we found very important, and as your children transition more closer to adulthood, sometimes it's more important not to have an opinion, and it's more important just to ask questions, because they're developing their thoughts, their world view, which you hopefully have had an input up to this point. But you come to a place where you trust the process, and you start asking questions, and you just start allowing that, even if they come up with an opinion that's different than yours, to exercise the patience to just allow it to just sit sometimes, as long as it's not, I mean, the addendum to that is as long as it's not going to be harmful. But there's times you just allow it, and then you just ask the questions about, okay, so what's the end result of that view, and allowing it through. So the conversation, how do you have a conversation with your child, is really the question I'm answering is ask questions. Ask questions about things that they're interested about.
Mm-hmm. And we continue to do that through the high school years, so you give time. I would like to interject here, so I don't forget it, that we started changing how we defined ourselves as a family. That we always say, well, we're a homeschool family. And it's true, we are a family who homeschools. But in the more junior years and so forth, we started fostering as a family, and ministry-wise, different things came up, and we realized we're life. We're doing life as a family, and part of our life is homeschooling. So that we made sure that we took these life experiences and we learned from those. Not that we did in school, but we didn't become, like mentioned by Diane, a slave to the curriculum, but it was serving our purposes. So maybe that might help on those days where you're not sure if learning is happening and stuff. Is life happening? Are we growing together as a family? Those things. And that's important to keep in mind in the high school years. High school years too, our children all they did like part-time jobs or paper, the free press paper, delivering those things. They needed their hands to put to something, and we gave them time to do that, to their part-time jobs, and to learn those skills as well, and that's important. For post-secondary, just checking our time to make sure I'm not running over. For post-secondary, we had one son who was going through Air Cadet and had expressed that he wanted to go into college, to military college. So through the cadets, he would be accepted in camps, but part of that was that he needed report cards. So I just went on to Microsoft, like they have a template, Word Office, there we go. Templates, and we just made up a report card. We took a template and we customized it to what he was studying and the needs and so forth. Put on there what school, homeschooled. I signed the document as I was the primary teacher and educator. And then we kept report cards. So I did find helpful, you don't need to do this, but I did find helpful in the high school years on the notification forms, like on the June reports, I would put grade 9 completed, grade 10 completed. I would sign that off on there. So for this particular child of ours, our son, grade 9, 10, and 11, and 12, we had report cards. And then he applied for, you need to go to recruiting office, and he applied for that. They needed those things. So I gave the report cards to it, and then he needed a transcript, obviously, for his grade 12 year, and HSLDA had a template on their website that we could use, and we customized it to our needs. And then he needed a diploma to take with him to show that he graduated, and we found a template and we customized it to him and sent it. He had a very good experience. We realized not everybody has had that, but he had a very good experience, and they did not disrespect him or yeah, he was respected, and we had a very smooth entry into post-secondary for him. So those are some of the questions, because I know it's scary if you think my child won't get into the degrees they want or so forth.
Just speaking to that, so a lot of times questions about the post-secondary is centered around the whole aspect of you know, am I teaching, is the child going to have gaps in their transitions, transcripts, credits, grades, and all these things. We never, full disclosure, we did very few actual tests or exams at all with our children. When we wrote up the transcript or the report card, kind of sat down and we, doing an honest assessment, said, okay, we figured it would probably be about this percentage because they wanted that on the report card. And so, we just gave that number, we gave that, that percentage in there. Our concern, so the journey that our son had, he thought he was going on one line, he transitioned to another, which is actually a lot of maths and sciences. He's in an engineering degree. So we're now looking, we never focused necessarily on maths and sciences, but so we weren't sure what we were dealing with gaps in him. So as he's going through some of these tests and his aptitude tests or whatever, came to realize that he's just right on line, even though it wasn't really our focus. Your child will show their interest, and your child will pursue those if we train them to learn and to educate themselves, which is in the high school years is where that takes off. So I just wanted to interject that just to let you know there's an aspect where you just got to trust that the system, the foundation that's been laid down will transition to that and allow it. So go ahead, Maureen. I'm sorry.
No, that was great. And that's so true, that when you taught them how to learn, where to find that knowledge, how to view that knowledge and critically think it through and pull from different resources and stuff, you have, they learn how to gain knowledge and wisdom from that. And so our children, our one son we mentioned about techie, he still, if he doesn't know something, will go in and he'll learn it and take it from different resources and so forth. Things that they haven't, they pick up, and it's incredible teaching giving them the basis, and then they explore from that. And so if they had a son and well, now I need chemistry, we ordered chemistry and let's do this and so forth. So again, teaching how to and exposing them to things and so forth, and having things at hand for them to learn to generate that time. And probably for the high school years, when your children are older, at one of the conferences, and I can't remember the speaker, just mentioned that give your children time. So there are sometimes I thought our children were doing nothing, and I would go to say something and then I'd hold back thinking of this, that sometimes you need to give them time just to think and process, not necessarily fall asleep and have a nap, but think and process. So I would pull back and just wait. And then it was amazing later on in the day how they go, Mom, I was thinking about this, and what are your thoughts? So I guess I would caution that have the curriculum and stuff, but make sure you put in time for them to think and process and quiet, go for a bike ride, those kind of things. And then be ready to answer the questions and to help them think that through as well. So that's kind of our journey in a nutshell, and we've never regretted homeschooling. Our children still love us, I think. Yeah, they do. They love us, so thank you.
Maureen and Earl, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. The website that you guys mentioned for the transcript help, that was at hslda.ca?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so it's www.hslda.ca, and I'll put that into the chat. Our next presenter is Angela Siemens. Angela comes to us from, if I remember right, it's Morris area. And welcome, Angela. I've got a picture that you sent here of your family, and I'm going to try and see whether I can bring that up and then share the screen. I was telling Bev that this doesn't always work.
Oh, we're just on screen.
Okay, here we go.
No,
No.
you might want to reduce the chat screen first.
Okay, can you see that?
Yeah, you didn't hit all participants. And you don't want to share the chat. Okay. Should you chat minimize? Just minimize it.
Angela, can you see that?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So I will be starting my 18th year of homeschooling this fall. So I've been doing this for a little bit. I've got 4 kids. The oldest is 25 years old and she's married. And then my next son is 23 and married. And then I have a 20-year-old and he is working full-time and part-time university. And then I've got the little one who's not so little because she just turned 16. I guess I'll tell you a little bit of our story. My husband and I did not agree on how we were going to educate our children when we got married. He had done a combination of public and private school, and that's what he thought was best was private and homeschooling, and that's what he was wanting me to do, was really to homeschool. Well, I had only had a public school experience and that was good enough for me. And besides, my mom had been a public school teacher. And then later on, both my parents became bus drivers and they had a really big influence on me. So homeschooling was not something I ever thought of, other than that I knew I was never going to do it. And I did not want to be that person in my extended family and friends to rock the boat. And so just an interesting side note, much later, my mom was asked to homeschool one of her grandsons who was really struggling with being bullied in school. And she did a total 360 and started to tell me all these exciting things about homeschooling that I had been telling her for years. So people can change, and I changed too. We ended up enrolling our oldest daughter in a smaller public school a little bit further away. It had smaller class sizes and a really good reputation in the community. But school started at 8:30 in the morning and it was done for other schools there. So when my daughter Nicole was in grade 1, she was on the school bus at 7:30 and she wasn't home until about 5. And I was not okay with these longer days. And I soon realized that I did not enjoy the lack of parental input in her day. I felt like I was losing control of being her parent. And it was a very, very hard year for me. I was wrestling with my pride and what was best for my kid. I knew that ultimately the decision to homeschool would be mine to make because my husband was on board. And I would be the one mostly doing it, right? So I had to be the one to decide. And I also knew, I had decided already in my mind that if we ever would decide to homeschool, I wanted it to be a lasting decision. I didn't want to be a person that had their kids home and then put them back in and had their kids home and put them back in. So no turning back unless the kids were terribly unhappy and wanted to change. So when her grade 1 year was just about finished, we found out about a new health curriculum that was going to be implemented in all of the public schools the following year. And we found it very disturbing, to say the least. And it was the final straw for both of us, especially for me, obviously. So we decided to homeschool, and really with only maybe 2 weeks left of the summer. So it was a really, almost a panicked decision, but it turned out really well. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the curriculum and some of the things that's worked for us, some different things. First of all, we did a lot of things together. I would also say that I'm an eclectic homeschooler. We did lots of things together. So if I was teaching some of the older ones And the little ones were always, you know, coming up to me and needing me. Well, I would put them on my lap and we would do things together. I would teach them as I was teaching the older ones, only in a much simpler way. We would draw pictures, just anything so that we could be together and not always have to be separated. That's really frustrating when you have more than, you know, when you have several children. Like what was mentioned earlier, we did lots and lots of reading. I mean, tons and tons of reading. So every day after lunch, I would read from a novel that we had chosen together, and the kids were always excited to get to lunch because they knew what was coming after lunch. When that novel was done, we would start another one. So I made sure that I was always reading something that they wouldn't really be able to read themselves yet. I wanted them to learn vocabulary, comprehension, and so when it was a really rough day, and of course, we all know what those are like when we're homeschooling. Some, you know, our days don't always go as planned. And if my school schedule was in total fail mode, I would just set everything aside and we'd get out the books and we would read some more. And I would probably stress that the most important thing to do with your children is to read to them. I read to them right through high school, which may seem a bit strange to some, but my kids say that it was their favorite thing about our homeschool day. And my daughter now is going into, my youngest is going into grade 11. And I asked her the other day if she wanted me to do read alouds, and she looked at me with a little grin and she said, yes, please. So reading's really important. We did lots of notebooking for the different things that we were learning. So if we went for a nature walk or field trips, or if we learned something really interesting in science or history, the kids would add fun things that they learned to their notebooks. And they loved it because they could be really creative, and it was really something fun that they could share with grandparents or friends whenever they would come over. Like someone else mentioned, oh man, I went through so many math programs. I finally found Math UC, which has worked for my children. The manipulatives, the hands-on learning was really, really good. And then for the higher level math, we switched to teaching textbooks. Science, Apology of Science, which was mentioned. And I would usually, when they were younger, I would always use that also as a read aloud. And we would do notebooks or lap books. We would do something fun with what they had learned. I don't think anybody has mentioned Mystery of History, and I think that's probably been our favorite history curriculum. I really liked how they put the secular history and they mixed it with the biblical and the church history, and it made one big picture. And there was a lot of aha moments for the kids when they were like, oh, that's when that happened, or oh, that's when that happened. So that was really great. And also for Canadian history, I can't say enough about Donna Ward's curriculum. She's a great Canadian curriculum writer. And so, and she's got all sorts of options. She's got, you know, one of her books is on Canada's natives, and then we would do unit studies on that. Or she had, from coast to coast, she would have all of the geography and then just Canadian history in general. And lots of good novels pertaining to what we were learning in Canadian history. I believe she has her own website. I think it's Northwoods Press, and that's where you can order her curriculum. So language arts was always a struggle for me. So we often did a lot of different things. We would do different workbooks. Sometimes it was like easy grammar workbook. We used some books from ACE, which has been mentioned, Accelerated Christian Education, or Alpha Omega, which were workbooks. That just made things a little bit easier for me as I was struggling to know how to teach language arts. Lots of spelling. Excuse me. And then later on in high school, we enjoyed doing novel studies and excellence in writing. If you want a good program to teach a really good program to teach essay writing, especially once they go into post-secondary education, excellence in writing is just that. It is really teaching on how to write excellently, and the essay writing is very substantial, and it's been very helpful for my older kids. If there was a certain interest that one of my kids had, like I had a boy who was just in love with birds. Well, we made a bird aviary. We just happened to live in a private school that used to be a private school that disbanded, and so we had a gym in our house. So we made a bird sanctuary basically, and he started breeding budgies and cockatiels, and then he would have to notebook about it, and then he would start marketing his birds and putting it all into a notebook. We did market gardening and selling to our local stores, and again, marketing, writing everything down, making a budget. It's real hands-on, real life learning. So those were the really, really fun times with our homeschooling, is when we would do stuff like that. So as the kids matured and they would head into junior high, I would expect them to take on more responsibilities with their learning, just which is what most homeschoolers would do. They would learn to set their own schedules. They would want to work around their extracurricular activities and later jobs, when they would have after-school jobs, or even when they would work 1 or 2 days a week, and then we would do school the other days. And I also wanted them to work more by themselves, right? Teaching themselves how to learn as they got older. So I would suggest, though, when your child is young, and especially now if you're new to homeschooling, make a schedule for your child if you're going that route. And I wouldn't put times or anything on it, but more like, this is what we're going to do in the morning, and this is what we maybe are going to try to do in the afternoon. And if it works, great. I know kids really like to have no surprises sometimes when it comes to schedules. That's what my kids were like, and they enjoyed the stability in that, even if we couldn't always do it every day. And often, you know, things would come up and we would do something different, but we would always go back to that routine if we could. And to make my day easier, when I had a house full of little ones, I would not do school on Mondays. It made life so much easier. We did laundry, we did chores, the kids did extra chores, we caught up on errands, we caught up on baking. Your kids help you with baking, that's great. It just really set the tone for the rest of the week, especially if we had a busy weekend. We could kind of all just take a breath on Monday. Let's get everything caught up that we need to in the house and with other things that we need to do, and then we'll get to school books, you know, tomorrow. And so that has worked very well when the kids were younger. So for high school, again, what was mentioned by the Taves is we would plan together what we were going to do, right? And that's the best way to do it. So we would have all the basic subjects, and then we would usually add an elective of their choice. What are their interests, right? If the child already had a goal for their future, we would try to work in some of those appropriate subjects if it happened to work out. If you have a child who wants to go into a trade later on, that you're just writing down, what are your kids doing in grade 9, grade 10, 11, and 12? Make sure you keep track of what they're doing. It really does make it easier for them later when they're asked, you know, what have they done? And for Apprentice Manitoba, a mom-made homeschool high school transcript was adequate. My son had recently taken college courses at Red River, and a high school diploma was not required, although that depends on the program that you're entering. And sometimes they require you to take a reading comprehension test. He's also been accepted into the University of Winnipeg. They wanted a transcript, and they also wanted a grade 12 portfolio. So the portfolio ended up being a sample of something that he had done in each subject, right? So whether that was a writing paper, or whether it was a test if he had done a test, and also a course description. So they were very specific in wanting that. That being said, some college advisors want to see an official Manitoba high school diploma, and I have experienced that with my oldest daughter. She wanted to go into dental assisting at the Red River Winkler campus, but they would not let her even apply without an official Manitoba diploma. So we brought in all her grade 12 books, and they said, they went through everything very thoroughly, actually. It was a scary moment for both of us. But they said at the end that she had done, I think the words were, you have done more than what you needed to do. And so it was a huge sigh of relief. But they had a policy, and that was regardless of how many of my credits they were going to transfer over, she was required to do one course through Red River. So she did their math course. She did it in a month and a half and did all the exams for that, the provincial exam. And then after that, they transferred all the homeschool credits plus the math program that she had done. And she got her Manitoba diploma. And I would definitely say every situation's different when you're applying at post-secondary institutions. And I found that it's really depending on who your advisor is and what their attitude is about homeschooling, because sometimes it's been easier and sometimes it's been a little bit more difficult. So my best advice about that is for high school is just really keep a record of what you're doing. Keep a record of the subjects that they're doing. If you're grading your kids, give them a grade. Keep close records, add it to your transcript, be consistent with your transcript so that, all of a sudden you need a transcript and, oh, well, I haven't even been doing that, right? So now you got to go back to grade 9 and you got to try to remember all these things. So really try to keep on top of that. It makes life really a lot easier once you get to the end game. And so basically that's my experience with homeschooling. I'm almost done. I can't believe it. And it's been great too. I've never regretted it, even though I had a really bad attitude at the beginning. It's been great. My kids have all thanked me numerous times. My kids love each other. They're best friends with each other. The most favorite thing that they can do is to be together. And now we're separated. Some of them live further away. So it's really special to have those close bonds. And you are the one that sets the tone in the family. And so you work on character issues as they're growing up. You don't have to deal with that at 3:30 or 4:30 when the kids come home. You deal with those things throughout the day. You deal with relationships and friendships among siblings throughout the day. And it's not like a last minute thing that you're trying to fix with your children, right? It's a constant character building situation. And not only for kids, but definitely for parents as well, because wow, I've learned so much. And my kids have put me in my place and my kids have corrected me, and I can't just be a parent at 3:30 or 4 o'clock either. I have to be a parent from, beginning to end. They see all of my flaws. And so we work things through, and it's been really great. So yeah. And if you want support in southern Manitoba, I can hook you up with a lady who's kind of in charge of the groups around here, and they have a co-op I know that's going on. A Facebook page is called Morrison Area Homeschool Group, and that involves Morris, St. Jean, Rosenort, Low Farm, and other existing areas. So yeah, that's about it.
Angela, thank you very much for sharing with us and for sharing your story and your family. I really appreciate that. What we'd like to do now is just have a question and answer time, so an opportunity to provide some additional information beyond what we've done, or to dive deeper. One of the questions that was asked was, what if you buy an American curriculum and the conversion, they don't use metric, and the history is American history,
biased.
and so how do you Canadianize these things? So Diane, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. It's actually not as big an issue as it was when I was young. When I was young, there was only American curriculum. So my mom got to be an expert adapting. The math is very, very easy to adapt. I mean, we need to learn about inches and feet. We need to. It's part of our world. And so basically, if the curriculum does not offer an option for our money or our measurements, then just take a day and talk about it. Use the exact same lesson, but add our money. use the exact same lesson, but add our measurements and just make some questions. You really only run into that in the younger years, where you, no matter what your no matter what your math knowledge is, you can make up a story problem to go with it. So I would say just add on a bit, or buy a dollar store Canadian math workbook and just do the money and the measurement pages, and then you've got that covered. For history, I would say it's important to, at some point, study American history as any other part of the world, and then maybe just skim it, and then pick a year or pick a semester and do Canadian history. As was mentioned by somebody else, Donna Ward has an excellent Canadian history program, and I believe Gather Round is coming out with some Canadian, I think First Nations people study, Indigenous people, as well as Canadian government. I don't know that those are released yet, but stay tuned for those. So I would say just teach the American history as it comes up, but then add on the Canadian stuff.
For another question that was asked, I'm going to, Christine, you, I know that you wanted to talk about special needs, and I know that that's something you have some experience in. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of time to cover that, and because I know that there's people that are interested from the chat yesterday.
And as she's talking, we posted a question asking what your favorite read aloud is. So a book that was read to you as a child, or a book that you've read to your children. So post to everyone so we can get just some great ideas for good books to read.
Go ahead, Christine.
Unmute yourself. So.
We can't hear you.
There you go.
There, we got it.
All right. Can you? Yes? Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to chat for a few moments about special needs. I think a lot of people, when they're looking at possibly homeschooling, they're a bit fearful about considering homeschooling a child that maybe has some disability, whether it's a more dramatic one or a more hidden one. But my oldest happens to have ADHD, the inattentive kind. She's a very bright girl, but with her, the nice thing is we've been able to adapt our curriculum so that it works good for her. She tends to be an auditory learner. She absorbs things so well when she hears them. So a lot of our history and science and things like that, we do more as a read aloud. So homeschooling actually gives you the freedom to meet your child's needs, probably better than they were ever being met in a public school, just because you're able to do that one-on-one tutoring and just really make it work for your child. So I also have a daughter with Down.
Not sure whether the weather tonight is interfering, but Christine, you're frozen. You may not be cold, but your image and sound is not coming through. I think we'll just keep moving along. I'm not sure whether others can hear us or not. Maybe nod your head if
Krista can see us.
Okay, we're coming through. Okay. One of the questions that was asked here on the chat, and I just ask that if you can just put your questions into the chat, and we'll address those. One question that came from Nympha's iPhone was, can we just enroll at an online school? If yes, what online school can you recommend? Should the online school be Canadian? Since I saw Abeka as one of you recommended on the list based in the US. Yes, Abeka does have online learning, both video and online. And certainly it's been a program that a lot of people have used over the years, but there's certainly a number of online schools that are just exploding in the days that have been happening lately. So there's lots of choices on that front. I know you guys were talking about one that you saw this evening, the old schoolhouse.
Schoolhouse, oh,
Teachers.
schoolhouse teachers?
Schoolhouse teachers. We'll put it.
They're everything that we talked about and some is on the MACHS website under curriculum, parent
Recommended curriculum.
recommended curriculum.
Sorry.
Go ahead. The other thing I was going to say is that there's quite a few online schools that are starting up this fall. Ontario, there's one there. I can't remember the name, but I'll try and find it. And anything we find, we'll post on the MECHS website. If anybody wants to make recommendations, let us know and we'll add them to there too, as well. The problem with online schools is that your child will be sitting in front of a computer all day long. Even in school, they don't sit all day long. So maybe if you're going to use that option, do it for 1 or 2 subjects, but do the other stuff as a unit study or as something if they're older that they can read about on their own and learn on their own. I would discourage you from putting them on a totally online school.
But
We
as
have
always,
we have a hard time recommending a good online school because that is very rarely a homeschooler's. It's very rarely what we choose because we want to spend time with our children and we want to disciple them and we want to teach them. And so you're going to have to go online and do some Googling and some researching. We try to recommend Christian online schools, so at least we know that our faith is happening and those values are being taught by the teachers online.
any other, Christine, you're moving again, so I'm gonna get your video up and give you a chance to finish off with your comments about the special needs. And you'll need to unmute again. There we go. There you go.
All right. Well, I don't know exactly where I was, but I know that I was speaking about my daughter with Down syndrome. And earlier, Diane was talking about how, you know, your kid might be in various places, various grade levels for various things. And the point is that you're moving them along. You're helping them get from point A to point B, and it might be a different place that they are. So I just think it's a really important thing to think about if you are homeschooling a child with special needs. In addition, just to your typical kids, to remember that you're moving them along on the path. And I think sometimes it can be discouraging when other children are reaching milestones, especially if your child is quite a bit behind. But you know, set some goals for your year and just work at them, and you've got this. It can be done, and there are support groups for homeschoolers that have special needs. I know one that I connected with for my daughter was homeschooling and Down syndrome, and so there are ones for kids with autism. There are ones for kids with specific styles of homeschooling. So Charlotte Mason and special needs or things like that. It's worth your while to pop in the terms for the kinds of things you're thinking of and just see if you can find a group through Facebook to connect with.
Thanks, Christine. One of the other questions that was asked is, what about using the curriculum that Manitoba Education provides, the provincial curriculum? The only provincial curriculum that is available, and I'm not sure how available it is right now, is the correspondence courses. The government doesn't provide any curriculum. If you use a correspondence, you have to pay for it. It actually comes from Alberta, and they're very intensive workbook style of curriculum that's used for the correspondence courses. So Manitoba government doesn't provide a curriculum. They also don't pay for it. One of the things that we're often asked is there any funding for home education? Do we get any money? The answer is no. There is no money that comes from the provincial government or from school divisions to home educators in Manitoba. And we're actually very supportive of that position because we believe that if we were to get money, and we've seen this happen over and over again in other places in the world and in other places in Canada, when there is money that comes, there's strings that come attached to it in terms of them then telling you what you can and can't do. So there's no money involved, and there's also no ability to claim any of the expenses. Sometimes people say, well, can I claim this as an expense in my taxes or that sort of thing? No, you can't. And the argument often is that you deserve it. You pay taxes like everybody else. Why shouldn't you be able to get some support? I don't argue that it costs money. It certainly does. But the question is, how much is your freedom to be able to freely direct the education of your children worth? And we believe that it's a very important thing to be able to do using. There is information, and Alma posted on the chat that there is information about Manitoba curriculum. And so there is information that says here's what the Manitoba government is using in their schools, and they have very thick books of curriculum guides that are available online, but they're not something that's very friendly to use. And so I don't want to say you can't use them, because you certainly can. But they're written for teachers in using in the schools, and that curriculum guide is available online, and you can certainly access that. But it is not a curriculum in itself in terms of giving you the textbooks or the workbooks or the resources that go with it to be able to utilize those things.
Basically an approved list of curriculums for teachers so that they know their options, and then the teachers get to choose which option they select. And so each teacher does teach differently in each school.
So Alex and Irene ask, is there a place where you can buy used curriculum other than besides a garage sale?
Do you want to ask Taves or?
Earl and Maureen, what's been your experience in where homeschoolers or where you were able to access used curriculum?
Great question. We connect with other homeschool families, so we've done swaps and stuff like that. That I had higher math, they had lower math, and we would switch it if we were using the same. Please make sure, though, that if you're doing answer key with certain books, that you have the right editions. If you have the first edition textbook and the second edition answer key, you may find some frustrating moments. But we swapped with other friends. Actually, thrift stores, NCCs and stuff like that have education material too, so we found stuff there. There has been homeschool swap meets, and lately the idea is on Facebook pages. People have been posting curriculum for sale, and then that's a great way to get feedback from there. So those would be some of my suggestions.
Christine, you just chatted a resource Facebook page. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, I'm not muted. All right. Yeah, there's a growing group on Facebook. It's Manitoba Christian Homeschoolers Curriculum Swap, and people who have stuff for sale can post it there. You can look there for things. You can put a request in saying you're in search of something in particular. And it's been a great way for people to connect, especially throughout the year, because often there's curriculum sales that people will put together, but they're only at specific times of the year, or they're a one-time thing. So this allows people to look and sell any time of the year.
Thanks, Christine. We have a question from Nympha, who's asking whether a transcript is the same as the assessment or the report that needs to be submitted to the government in January and June. And Angela, can I ask you to talk about what's the difference between a transcript and a progress report, the January and June reports?
Okay, so the January and June reports is something actually that you're going to get from the government, that they're going to tell you, we want you to fill this out in January, and we want you to fill this out in June. Tell us what you've done. You don't even necessarily need to put grades down. Yeah, and that transcript, I mean, I would only do a transcript for grades 9 through 12. And like was mentioned, you can go to HSLDA and you can get something to copy there. But there it's more specific. There I'm definitely more specific. Whereas the January and June report, I'm kind of just, I guess, satisfying what the government's requirement is. So I'm not as specific as I would be in a high school transcript.
Thanks, thanks, Angela. Krista is asking, do people ever teach children of different ages at the same grade level? An example would be a gifted 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. Diane, do you want to?
Yeah, I can answer that. I'm sure others can too. I've heard of that happening a lot. I have a lot of friends, especially children close in age or children who have different strengths and weaknesses. I know I've had friends where, the younger one catches up to the older one in reading, and hey, if you can teach 2 kids together, it's gold. and maybe eventually the older one will pick up. It happens. I've often taught, my 2 girls are close in age, they're 2 years apart, and I've taught a lot of subjects together. Very rarely math because they've been very distant and reading. My younger one didn't really read much until grade 5, and my older child was reading chapter books in kindergarten. So each kid is different, but they have all along been doing science together. They've always done history together. They've always done social studies. They've done arts. Those kind of subjects we do together all the time. And I think it's great if you can teach them together. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think pushing the younger child, as long as you're not holding back the older one, is totally fine. It's the joy of homeschooling.
Thank you. Any other questions that any of you have that would like to put forward to have addressed here this evening? Any things that you were hoping that you would get some answers to, but haven't yet this evening? And Dan, thanks for posting the information about the Manitoba Education Independent Study options and the website for that. The high school course is $250 for 1 credit, which will add up pretty quickly. But certainly an option, and people utilize that.
From those that have taught high school, do you have any curriculum recommendations that you want to put forward other than probably the ones that you've already said? Earl and Maureen, or
You have me on the mic? You can hear me? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you, Christine. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we're doing a bit of an unschool style, and that doesn't mean that my kids aren't doing high school level things. But what was the specific question? I lost my train of thought.
High school recommendations.
It's just, I really recommend going with where your child's interest lies as much as you can. Like, depending on your style, that will look different for various things. But as people have already said, you want to make sure they're engaged. So they're mostly all really good. Yeah.
So we've got a number of people here that some that are interested in high school, but we've got quite a number of people that this is new. They're exploring this. They're trying to decide, and maybe they have decided. But I'd like to ask each one of our panelists to give some recommendations on, in the next month, what kinds of things do you recommend people do or not do to get started and just to get off on the right foot. So I'm going to ask Earl and Maureen if you could start. Just you know, we're sitting in your living room, we're having a coffee together, and we're saying, so we're starting this next week. What tips do you have for our first month?
Breathe. Take time to breathe, because you can get in a panic. Breathe. And I would say, because if you're a first-time homeschooler and you have that 30 days to send in the notification form, don't sit down at the computer and in the next 4 hours try to figure out all the curriculum. You're going to be so overwhelmed. I would break it down and go, in the next few days, I'm just going to look at math options and talk it over with your spouse. If you have older children, talk it over with them, see what they would think. And I would break it into sections of choosing curriculum. But I would remind myself to keep breathing, and then I would slowly start to set up what your day would look like. And so, you know, if it's chores, devotions, however you're going to do it, I would slowly start to implement that. I know my sister too found it helpful that they just implemented one subject at a time, and when they got that, then they could move to the next one. So be flexible, sit back and talk it over with your spouse. And if I look back at my early years, I would tell myself to menu plan, to know what to put on supper in the crock pot in the mornings, because your days are full and it can be tiring. But remember to breathe, give yourself grace.
And give yourself grace. You don't need to figure it out in the first month. Love your time with your children. Again, you don't want them establishing this first month as, you know, this might be their version of hell on earth, because you're determined, come hell or high water, we're going to get this going. You just love the time together, right? And even the whole thing of setting a schedule. In the first week, don't worry about the schedule. Just be together with your children and just enjoy, right? It's for us, our priority has always been family discipleship, right? And the model of just spending that time, right? So that first month it's like anything. A lot of times you come into something, and I've really come over the course of life, sometimes you don't even, when you're entering a new endeavor, there's times you don't even know the questions to ask because it's so new, right? Which is why a lot of you are on this online call, right? So just give yourself time, give yourself grace, give your children grace and time. And then the schedule and all that, it does come. It does fall into place, just to encourage you with that.
So Earl, can I ask you a question as a homeschool dad, an experienced one? I suspect that over the course of the next month, we're going to get a number of moms in particular, it could be dads too, that are going to say, this is not working. This is just too hard. And I need to quit. You know, this is, I don't know whose idea this was, but it's not working. How can you encourage dads to be, you know, what should dads say when they hear that?
To me, word pictures are huge. So I would use the whole, put yourself, and I mean, now we're all parents, so we're very new, and we're, you know, new homeschooling parents. So we're very near to the toddler stage of when our children started walking. You know, moving to the crawling stage, there was a lot of bumps and bruises on the way, but you didn't stop. Moving to the standing up stage, there's a lot of bumps and bruises on the way, but you didn't stop. To the walking stage, there's a lot of bumps and bruises on the way, but you didn't stop. And so this is it. Just acknowledge, hey, I'm in this, you know, in the progression of a child moving, you know. Well, you know, it's so exciting when they call it the A-frame, when your child sticks his bum up in the air and the hands and shoulders are on the, you know, feet and hands are on the ground, and the child starts moving, and you just like, this is good. So that's the thing. You don't expect your child to be able to run right out of the womb. You know, give yourself that sense too, right? And there's many times, and this is our own journey. When we started, it was Maureen's conviction. And I was kind of like, we already had our life set up that it would work, that she was at home, so okay, we can continue on with that. It wasn't my conviction, but it's like, that's fine, I'm not opposed to it, let's go. That transitioned within 2 years, where it very strongly became my conviction, which was a good thing, because then exactly that, there was a place where Maureen was very frustrated and she was like, I can't do this, I'm ruining my children. You know, the whole aspect of, you know, we're not getting along, right? And so it became my conviction and saying, no, you can do this, honey, you can do this, you can do this. So fathers, more often than not, our wives are the primary educators in the home. You gotta just, we have to encourage, we have to be there for them for sure. But you're not gonna start off running, you're gonna start off crawling, and be okay with that.
Thanks, Earl. Really appreciate that. One of the things that I've learned, and I'm still trying to learn, is that as a dad and a husband, my reaction so many times is to try to solve the problem, to give the answer, to say, here's what we should do, versus saying, honey, could you just, you know, tell me more about this? You know, I'd like to hear how you're feeling, and look her in the eyes and say, can you tell me more? And just listen. And that's really hard, but do that. I'm going to ask, we're going to do a little bit of a trip here, and
I just have a comment though.
okay.
You're talking about that first month. When we started homeschooling, we started grade 1 with Diane, and back in that days, there was no internet. We had to look for curriculum via mail and telephone, and by the time we decided the week before school started, there was no way you were going to get curriculum within the first 3 weeks. So they suggested we do a unit study on the human body. So I got a little book with pictures of the different parts of the body, and we traced her body onto a big sheet of paper, and we talked about the different parts of the body, and we cut them out and colored them and glued them onto the wall, onto the different parts of the body, and we spent time doing that. And she thought this was a lot of fun, because you know, 6-year-old, like, this is really cool, and we talked about all different parts of the body. The other family that started homeschooling at the same time as us in our community, who actually convinced us to homeschool, her husband's family, they had older children, and they were told, do a unit study on survival. Talk about survival, build forts, read books about people that had to survive in the wilderness, read the Bible about King David when he had to hide in the caves, do math about the different things that happened in the Bible in that time, like the boys, there were 2 boys, grade 3 and 4, and they had to make up story problems based on the story of King David hiding in the caves. And they using the verses, they made up math story problems about how many people were in the cave and how many people were out of the cave. And if you didn't remember that King David was one of them, you would get the answer wrong. It was, they actually had a lot of fun, and most of their public school friends were extremely jealous of them, because they got to sit in the teepee they made and listen to Mom read stories about survival.
Thanks, Bev. Great suggestions, and I'm gonna go. We're gonna take a trip to Morris and join Angela. And Angela, what advice do you have for our folks here in their first month as they're starting their journey?
Well, first of all, I would say that it's September. The weather, we could have some beautiful weather. Let's not sit in the house. It basically what the Taves has said as well. You know, don't start everything at once. Take it really slowly. We tend to be outside a lot. We tend to put the bookwork away until there's a rainy day or a cold day, because they're coming. The first day of public school, September 8th, I believe, we normally have a party on the first day of public school, because I want my kids to be excited that, you know what, they get to be home and we get to do things a little bit differently. So I would say keep it stress-free, keep it fun. You know, if you have all of your 5 or whatever subjects, okay, just start with one the first day. You know what, and maybe only do that for a week. Sometimes we do, you know, just one thing for a week, get used to it, maybe add something the next week. Hey, but if the sun is shining, let's go play outside. It's September. You've got all winter to do school.
Thanks, Angela. Appreciate that. There's a question about, is there any sample of filled out progress report or notification forms on the Matches website? I don't think there are samples right now. There used to be, and we'll check on it, but there are some videos that you can watch on how to fill those forms out. And you can, that is on the Matches website, so you can find those. And there is also samples that Manitoba Education has on their website of completed forms that give you some sample wording.
Gerald?
Yep.
There is, I went on there and used the search recently, and there is a blog post from about 3 years ago where Dania had put a couple of forms on there.
Okay. Okay, I knew that I thought that there was some, and we just couldn't find them. But we'll try and see if we can put them in a more prominent place, and utilize those. But they're certainly available, and they're around. Christine, any advice from your perspective, from your easy chair there as you're sipping coffee? What do you recommend for the first month? What advice do you have?
Some of it's going to look a lot like what others have already said. I think depending on, you know, the age of the kids, if people are coming along and they're starting their child in kindergarten, you'll ease into the teacher role a little bit different. But if your kids have already been to public school or private school, sometimes it helps to do what some refer to as deschooling, where you're working on building the relationship with your kids and starting to change it into mom as teacher, not so that it's not like come September 8th, if you're starting school that day, all of a sudden here's mom, and mom says you got to get this work page done and you got to do this, and that can be a really, really hard adjustment for kids. So I would recommend things like, well, coming from the Unschool approach, I know that things like games and baking and nature walks and so on, those are all really great learning things. And so I'd start with a good smattering of some of those kinds of activities where you're going to be learning and enjoying the company of each other. And then, like others have said, start easing in some of the other subjects. Maybe you want to start with some math stuff. So maybe for a few days or a week, you want to start adding in just that. And I would do it kind of like a rhythm, so that, you know, you're doing this similar thing at the similar time of day, just to start getting a bit of a rhythm going there. And, you know, like some of those things are great things to continue on, and you might just decide that you like to do nature walks, and you may want to start including some of those things even into your curriculum, even if you're doing more of a workbook or a different kind of approach there. It's just, I found, at least for my son, he really, really struggled with now I have to do school. And so if I could go back and tell myself, you know, what to do when I first started homeschooling, it would have been to ease in and to really work on the mom-kid relationship and starting to just form it into a, we're going to enjoy learning together kind of an approach.
It helps if I unmute when I talk. Thanks, Christine. I'm going to ask Diane to make some comments. We're not in our living room, but Diane, any first month 30 days comments?
My first thought was, everybody's really concerned about going home and your kids are going to miss their friends. And school is a place where they do make friends. They do see kids their own age. And that is a huge thing for people pulling their kids out of school. And first of all, I want to say, use this time to develop sibling relationships. Don't underestimate the power of those relationships. When your kids get along when your kids are friends, when your kids are best friends, when your kids learn how to solve arguments, how to figure out getting along. These are the people where if you have a fight, you can't just run off to school and forget about it and come home and ignore the problem. You have to deal with it. You're around these people all day and you're around these people your whole life. When we're gone, your kids have each other. And I would say spend the first month working on those relationships. Find ways where the kids can have fun together, do activities together, have sleepovers together. I've had my girls have a sleepover together. They shared a room, but they had a sleepover together. So work on those relationships first, and then try and find some homeschoolers that you can get together with. Use the Facebook pages, use homeschoolers that you know, ask around. I'm hoping to make a thread on the MACHS discussion Facebook page and use that page. I want to make a thread for different areas so people can find other homeschoolers to hang around with. It doesn't have to be a homeschool co-op. It doesn't have to be an educational group. It can just be a couple of families getting together. During COVID, find a family that also shares your social distancing values. Find a family that's comfortable with the same kind of contact you are, and don't search out 20 friends for your kid. Don't even search out 5. If your kid has 1 or 2 friends, similar age, not even the same age, doesn't matter, that they can connect with, preferably a family that you can connect with too, then that's enough. It's okay if you only have 1 or 2 friends. They'll be fine. They don't need a classroom of friends. They just want to hang around with some other kids. So if you can find some other kids, you're set.
Thanks, Diane. I've just launched a bit of an evaluation poll, and would ask if you could just take a few minutes as we're wrapping up here to give us some feedback. If you'd like to continue to ask us questions, you can do that. You can access us at the Matches email, which is info@machs.ca, and you'll find that email on their website, a number of places. You can access us through the Facebook page and discussion group, Matches Facebook page and Facebook discussion group. Feel free to ask questions there. The great thing about the discussion group is that you get to ask each other questions and provide feedback and those kinds of things and share. So I'd like to thank our presenters this evening for their time and for their sharing. Remind everyone that we will be sending out an email letting you know the link for the Tuesday evening session starting next week, Tuesday, where we'll be having a question and answer and support time. So that'll be ongoing for the next while, at least the next 4 to 6 weeks. And that'll be coming up in an email. Thank you for coming. We know that we haven't answered all of your questions. But we do know that there are homeschoolers all across this province who are anxious to be able to pass on and help you. So feel free in the various Facebook groups and chats to be able to ask questions of the veterans and to get information from them, because there's a lot of experts who have a lot of experience.
And feel free to tell your friends about the Tuesday night chats. And once we send out the recording of this video, share with your friends. Even if, let's say, your parents, the grandparents, have a lot of questions, they can tune in on Tuesday night chats. If there's an aunt or uncle or somebody who you just need help explaining this whole crazy idea to them, feel free to share that link with anybody who would benefit from it. It's not just an exclusive club for whoever registered. Like, we want to help you and everybody.
So thank you all, and we look forward to spending some time again with you next Tuesday. And as you have questions, just feel free to send us an email, send us a message on Facebook, and we'd be glad to be able to continue to respond and to share with you this joy of the homeschool journey as you spend time getting to know your children and learning together with them. Thank you all. Have a good night.